So, this next Patreon request comes from John McKinney, who asked me to do my 10 most underrated Disney villains. Now, the thing of it is that Disney villains, they're pretty well rated, right? Like, I think we can all agree they're all pretty well-rounded, they're pretty... everyone knows a Disney villain. Like, there are a lot of Disney villains that are very well known, and even if you're in the cult following, there's no like unknown Disney. Well, might be one or two I'm going to talk about today, but we're going to be talking about the underrated villains. But before we do that, as always, if you guys would like to have a Patreon request done, just hit the link below, head on over to my Patreon, where you guys can hit the third tier. That will allow you access to do so, as well as check out all the other videos over on Patreon from the other tiers as well. But other than that, let's get started. Now, like I said, if you think a villain should be on this list, just keep in mind it's my list. I'm always excited to hear what others have to say. And I also... this is not going to be a top 10 list. This is just 10 villains that I think are pretty underrated. These are some villains that I personally believe are pretty underrated. If you don't think so, that's totally fine. I got no problem with that. But anyway, let's get started. So I'm going to be talking about two villains in particular. Starting off this list, I'm going to be talking about two villains in particular that I believe are pretty underrated when it comes to, you know, underrated villains. Like, these are the two definitions, and they come from the same movie franchise, too. The Rescuers. I'm going to be talking about Madame Medusa and McLeish. Let's start off with McLeish first. McLeish is one of my favorite Disney villains because he is so fucking scary. He's literally the closest he's like an animated version of Mick Taylor from the Wolf Creek movies. If you know what I'm talking about, then you understand. Yeah, I have never met a more real villain. He's a poacher, and he kidnaps this kid and will throw him to crocodiles when he's done with him. He also is voiced by George C. Scott, who gives a great voice performance. He's cruel, he's violent, he's devious, he is all these things. Quite literally the most, like, again, real villain. Outside of Frollo, one of the most real villains I have ever seen in a Disney film. Also, his pet monitor lizard, Joanna, is just hilarious. Did you eat my eggs? Just had to throw out that line. But yeah, so McLeish, no one talks about him. Very underrated, probably because the whole movie... Rescuers Down Under is a fucking awesome movie. That movie's fire. Anyway, Madame Medusa from the original 1970s, 80s? I don't know. Yeah, the original Rescuers. No one talks about Madame Medusa. She kind of does the same thing McLeish does, but a little more cartoony. And I think it's just kind of either the animation style or the voice acting, or honestly, it's a bit of both, if I'm being real, where you have this kind of over-the-top performance. She's a lot of fun, but she's also, again, we play in that whole thing of, like, it's another very real-feeling villain. It's a villain who feels like a legit, honest-to-God threat and someone you could actually meet in real life. And I think that's kind of one of the reasons why I think the Rescuers villains are so scary, because they're almost like a little take away the cartoonishness of their performances. They're people you could run into, you know, or your kids could run into. That's even a scarier thought. So there you go. So I thought, so when I was thinking of this list, like thinking of 10 underrated Disney villains, I was like, oh yeah, Madame Medusa and McLeish. It's not like that's a given, right? Like, that's a straight up given. But moving on to our next villain, this one I was like, yeah, he's here, but no one talks about him. It sucks. And that is, for terms of underrated villains, I am going to say Rattigan. Rattigan is just, again, he's voiced by Vincent Price. That's an automatic win. If your villain is voiced by Vincent Price, then you're an automatic win, if you ask me. It is a hilarious performance, and apparently Price said that this was his favorite performance of all time, voicing Rattigan. It was also apparently on his bucket list to voice a character for Disney. I don't know if that part's true. I believe it because he very much loved animation and doing voice acting. But yeah, when your villain is voiced by Vincent Price, try saying that 3 times fast, you get points for me. Ratigan is also probably, he is brutal. He is straight up killing people right in front of you. He's got these over elaborate traps. He's almost like a miniature Batman villain in a way, where he's got all these over elaborate traps. He's killing off henchmen. He's also not afraid to like beat the shit out of you with his bare hands. And he also has like this just unbridled savagery underneath this veneer of, you know, of charm and like civility. And I like that. I really do like that. And again, Ratigan is a villain no one talks about. So definitely Ratigan. Next up, we have Clayton. Clayton from Tarzan. This one's might be debatable, but Clayton, I think, is another one of those realish villains of that time, where there were a good amount of. He represents the colonizer. He represents the colonizer. He represents the poacher, the hunter, and it's a great performance by Brian Blessed. And he also had one of the most brutal, if not the most brutal death of any Disney villain. Let's be real. That scene, you know what I'm talking about. Like, woo! Even as a kid when I first saw that, I was like, woof, damn. Anyway. So, yeah, he's definitely a great character. I think he's also got some physicality to him. I really enjoyed his work, what's the word? Him being a villain. Again, he's not really like what I consider a major villain, but definitely like one that it was intelligent. He was also violent and dangerous. Also, if you know your stuff, Clayton, in the original novels of Tarzan, that's Tarzan's uncle. Yeah. Think on that. I don't, I'm sure, and I'm tired of the evil uncle thing, so I'm glad they didn't bring that up, though. Anyway, moving on to our next villain. Our next villain's another one of contention, I would say, but I think it's because I wanted to bring this up because this is a villain who basically gets the short end of the stick every time because there's another cat-themed villain that everyone knows about. And that is Shere Khan. Shere Khan's my favorite Disney villain. And I know it sounds like a little biased, but Shere Khan is by far my favorite Disney villain. He's cold, he's calculating, he's brutal, and you get the sense that when he doesn't need lackeys, he can just do all the dirty shit himself. He's just this, this villain who will come at you, and he's almost like a monster he's like a monster in the shadows, where everyone knows him and is afraid of him for a good reason. And honestly, I think he was made even better with it, in the Jon Favreau live-action remake. Yeah, personally, I think the only live-action Disney remake I like is Jungle Book. And one of those reasons is because they really give a great performance from Idris Elba as Shere Khan and make you feel like, oh shit, this guy's for real. Like, there are even scenes where he's just like, I'm not gonna kill you, but you know I could. Like that scene where he's like got the pup and he like blocks his path right in front of the mom, and he's just like, you know I could do this, right? You saw what I did to Aquila. So but again, Shere Khan, I think gets the reason why I don't think people talk about Shere Khan is because he's overshadowed by Scar. And yeah, Scar's cool and all, but Shere Khan doesn't need anybody. Shere Khan doesn't need an army of hyenas. He doesn't need to sing about how cool he is or how he's gonna kill everybody. No, Shere Khan's gonna fuck you up and then eat you while you're still screaming. That's Shere Khan. Like, that is 100% Shere Khan right there. So, but no one ever talks about Shere. Again, I know he has a popularity to him, but again, he's been overshadowed by Scar. I don't know why Disney can't market both both cat villains, But clearly there's some favoritism going on, I'm just saying. Our next Disney villain, I decided to bring up this one because he's underrated, and as opposed to Shere Khan, who is more, in your face and direct and will kill you without giving it a second thought, this villain can be summed up with one word. Mommy. Yeah, I'm talking about Prince John. Prince John is not a threatening villain. He's basically every billionaire. Also, you gotta love a classic Disney movie from the 70s that says "Death to Tyrants." Yeah, let's get some anarchy going. But Prince John is just fun. He's not scary. He's just basically medieval Elon Musk, where he bitches about everything, does nothing to help, and will cry foul every time things don't go his way. Did I get it right? Anyway, so he's just fun. Like, Prince John is just a fun villain. He's fun. Like, all of the over-the-top reactions to everything, how he thinks he's the smartest guy in the room, and really he's just the biggest fucking idiot you've ever met. But you just can't help but watch him. Like, every time he's on scene, you're like, I wonder how he's gonna have an emotional breakdown now. Anyway, so there you go. So we've got four more villains to talk. We've got four more villains to talk about in this list. Next up, I'm going to be talking about Governor Ratcliffe. Why I picked Ratcliffe? He's an underrated villain, and again, a lot of these villains I'm bringing up, a lot of them feel pretty real, and that's what I think Ratcliffe really represents when you talk about, real villains that Disney did. He is, again, going back to what I said about Clayton, he is the colonizer, he is the guy who is stoking all this hatred for people. His whole song is about committing genocide. Do you guys remember? Like, yes, I know, you can make the argument that the Native American tribes were talking about, yeah, we're going to fight them off, but, his whole song is literally about, we are going to go, they're not like you and me, means they're evil, let's go kill them all. Guys, I mean, the Pocahontas movie is horribly inaccurate to what really happened in history, and is a black mark for Disney representation for Native Americans. But I'm not the right person to kind of go into those details. There's other channels that do it better. But Ratcliffe is, he's basically he is a monster of a human being. The whole thing is, I just want to find gold, kill natives, and then get my title, even at the expense of my own men. Just sounds like people you hear today. Anyway, so that is number 7. Let's move on to our next villain, and that is the marvelous Mad Madam Mim. Mim didn't get a lot of attention or any screen time, really, but when she was there, when you had Mim there on screen time, with screen time, you couldn't take your eyes off of that villain. She was bouncing off the walls. The animation really helped with that. The voice performance, all of that, and the wizard's duel with Merlin is the high point of the movie. Usually after, I'm gonna be real, I like the Sword and the Stone. But if I'm being honest, the movie kind of peters out after the Wizard's duel, right? I know it's a controversial take. At least I think it, maybe not, but after the battle between Mim and Merlin, movie peters out. It just kind of you're just everything else can just be But again, just so much energy, so much fun. She's a great character. I honestly really liked Mim a lot. And finally, we're going to be talking about our next villain is our next villain isn't really what I would call definitely remembered, but it's a horrible movie. It's a good villain, at least I think. It's a good underrated, the definition of underrated. It's a good villain from a bad movie, god-awful movie. And that is Alameda Slim from Home on the Range, or Ope on the Range, whatever the hell. It's the one with the talking cows. Slim definitely brings energy to this movie. It was the last 2D animated Disney film they did. It basically killed 2D animation because it was so god-awful. But Alameda Slim is fun. Like, he's a cattle rustler who hypnotizes cows with his yodeling. He's so fucking off the wall. And I remember watching, because I had the DVD for some god-awful reason. I remember watching the deleted scenes or the subplots they had, and in the script originally Alameda Slim, rather than just be a cattle wrestler, he had a different goal, because they're like, well, this movie's so even the makers of this movie were like, man, this movie's kind of dumb. Let's give it a dumb villain plot. Basically, Alameda Slim wasn't going to be a cattle rustler. He was going to be using he was going to hypnotize all these cows to invade the White House and become president. What? I like that plot. Like, that plot is way more fun. That plot is so fucking stupid. I love it. Like, it just that would have made the movie way more better if your villain plot is, I'm going to take an army of cows, fight the U.S. Army of the 1800s, and take over the White House with my army of cows through my yodeling. What? Yeah, I would have. But again, he's just a fun villain in a god-awful movie. But yeah, so there you go, guys. Those are my 10 picks for underrated Disney villains. I know there were other villains I could have used, like the Horn. I wasn't going to use the Horned King. I know some people are like, well, why didn't you talk about the Horned King? I think at this point we all agree that the Horned King is a very underrated villain. I don't think it goes without saying. And I think everyone knows now that the Horned King and the Black Cauldron is a good movie, regardless of the edits. So that's why I didn't bring... I know some people are probably in the comments like, why didn't you talk about the Horned King? Because I was like, everyone's going to talk about the Horned King. Let's give some spotlight to some other villains, shall we? Also, I didn't use villains from the TV shows, because this was supposed to be movie-centric. I should have brought that up earlier in the video. But there you go. Once again, I'd like to thank John McKinney for this Patreon request, as well as continued patronage. And you guys tell me in the comments below, what are 10 underrated Disney villains in your opinion? Just comment below, let me know. Other than that, hope you all enjoyed this. I'm Mr. Multiverse. I'll see you next time in the Multiverse.